I still remember the moment my world collapsed around me. It wasn't during one of our increasingly frequent arguments or after discovering suspicious text messages. It was while I was drifting in and out of consciousness in a recovery room, still, groggy from anesthesia, when a hospital administrator awkwardly handed me divorce papers. My husband Nathan had chosen the very day of my life-saving surgery to legally end our marriage. What Nathan couldn't possibly have known was that his calculated timing would ultimately lead to his own undoing in a courtroom moment I'll never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled my nostrils as I tried to focus on the document in my trembling hands. The words, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage, swam before my eyes. Even through the fog of post-surgical medication, I recognized Nathan's signature, confident and bold, just like the man himself. Or rather, the man I thought I knew. I had undergone emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix that morning. What doctors initially diagnosed as severe stomach flu turned out to be much more serious, requiring immediate intervention to prevent potentially fatal complications. Nathan had dropped me off at the hospital entrance with a quick, "I've got an important meeting. Text me when you're done." No kiss, no reassuring squeeze of my hand, just pragmatic detachment that I'd grown accustomed to in our 8 years of marriage. The hospital staff had tried to reach Nathan throughout my surgery. 5 calls went straight to voicemail. When a courier arrived with an envelope marked urgent, personal delivery at the nurse's station, they assumed it contained important documents I needed to sign. In a way, I suppose they were right. "Mrs. Hargrove, I'm so sorry," the administrator said, hovering uncertainly by my bedside. "This was delivered for you. The courier was quite insistent you receive it today." She placed the manila envelope on my lap, concern etched across her face. I remember how heavy it felt, how official, how final. The surgical incision across my abdomen throbbed painfully as I shifted to examine the contents, but it was nothing compared to the searing ache that bloomed in my chest as I read through the documents. Nathan wasn't just filing for divorce. He was requesting an expedited process, claiming our assets were minimal and already informally divided. He was asserting that our penthouse apartment, which we'd purchased together, was primarily his, since he had made the down payment. He made no mention of my tech company, which had quadrupled in value over the past 3 years. Most shockingly, he claimed we had no significant joint assets beyond basic household items. I knew immediately this was categorically false. We had investment properties in Colorado and Florida. We owned a vacation cabin on Lake Tahoe that generated substantial rental income. We had art collections, investment accounts, and a wine cellar, valued at over $200,000. None of these appeared in his filing. As the reality of Nathan's betrayal crystallized in my mind, a strange calm washed over me. The monitor tracking my heart rate showed barely a blip in my pulse, something the attending nurse later commented on with surprise. "You're remarkably composed," she observed, adjusting my IV. Most people would be falling apart. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But I wasn't most people. And this wasn't my first experience with betrayal. Before meeting Nathan, I had built a successful cybersecurity firm from the ground up, navigating the male-dominated tech industry with determination that often bordered on stubbornness. I had weathered corporate sabotage attempts, weathered countless instances of being underestimated, and overcome numerous professional setbacks. Along the way, I'd developed not just resilience, but a strategic mind that automatically analyzed problems rather than succumbing to emotion. "Could you hand me my phone, please?" I asked the nurse, my voice steadier than I expected. She hesitated. "Dr. Winters advised rest for at least 24 hours, no work calls." "It's not for work," I assured her. "There's someone I need to contact. Immediately." That someone was Vanessa Chen, one of the most formidable divorce attorneys in the state. We had met 3 years earlier at a Women in Business conference where I delivered the keynote address. We'd stayed in touch, occasionally meeting for lunch to discuss the challenges of being women in our respective fields. What Nathan didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Vanessa had recently won a landmark case involving hidden marital assets that had set new precedents in family court. "Olivia," Vanessa answered on the second ring. "It's been too long. How are you?" "I've been better," I replied, glancing down at the divorce papers. "I'm currently in the hospital recovering from emergency surgery, and Nathan just had divorce papers delivered to my recovery room." The momentary silence on the other end spoke volumes. "He did what?" The quiet intensity in her voice conveyed more outrage than any shouting could have. "That's remarkably cold, even by the standards I typically see." "It gets worse," I continued, flipping through the documents. "He's claiming we have minimal joint assets. No mention of the properties, investments, nothing." "Are you still at Memorial?" Vanessa asked, her tone shifting from friend to attorney in an instant. "Yes, just out of surgery about 2 hours ago." "I'm coming to you. Don't sign anything. Don't call Nathan. Don't do anything until I get there." The determination in her voice was exactly what I needed in that moment. As I waited for Vanessa to arrive, I forced myself to read through every page of Nathan's petition methodically. The legal language was deliberately dense, but the message was clear. Nathan was attempting to manipulate my vulnerable state to secure a quick, favorable settlement before I could mount an effective response. What I couldn't understand was the timing. Why now? Why like this? Nathan and I had been growing apart for months, our conversations shorter, our intimacy non-existent. But there had been no discussions about separation, no mentions of divorce. If anything, I had been the one occasionally suggesting couples counseling, which Nathan dismissed as unnecessary because we were just going through a busy phase. As I pondered this question, a text message illuminated my phone screen. "Nathan, I assume you received the papers. I wanted to handle this as cleanly as possible. Call me when you're ready to discuss terms." The clinical detachment of his message ignited something within me. Not anger, exactly, but a crystalline clarity that would fuel me through the challenging months ahead. This wasn't simply about ending our marriage. This was about erasing my contributions, minimizing my claim to our shared life, and, I strongly suspected, hiding substantial assets. I didn't respond to his message. Instead, I opened my banking app, immediately noticing that our joint checking account had been drained except for a nominal balance of $500. Exactly the minimum required to keep the account open without incurring fees. The transfer had occurred 3 days earlier, the same day I'd received my diagnosis and scheduled emergency surgery. The timing wasn't coincidental. It was calculated. By the time Vanessa arrived, her designer briefcase contrasting sharply with the clinical setting of my hospital room, I had moved beyond shock to something more productive. Strategic assessment. She took the visitor's chair beside my bed, her expression compassionate but focused. "First, how are you feeling physically?" she asked, setting the groundwork for what would become one of her most defining characteristics throughout our journey together. Unwavering concern for my well-being alongside her fierce legal advocacy. "I'll heal," I said simply. "The doctors say I should recover fully with proper rest." She nodded, opening her briefcase and removing a legal pad. "I've reviewed the documents you texted me. Nathan's petition contains multiple concerning elements that suggest he's been planning this for some time." "The timing wasn't random," I agreed. "He knew I'd be at my most vulnerable. People who choose moments like this to serve divorce papers are typically operating from one of two motivations," Vanessa explained, her tone professional but tinged with barely concealed disgust. "Either they're acting from pure emotional cruelty, or they're making a calculated strategic move, hoping your compromised state will prevent proper scrutiny of their claims." "Knowing Nathan, it's the latter," I said. "He's never been cruel. For cruelty's sake, he's always strategic." Vanessa nodded, making notes. "Based on what you've told me about your joint assets and what's disclosed here, we're looking at significant financial concealment. How have you managed your finances during your marriage?" I explained that while I maintained separate accounts, for my business, Nathan had gradually taken over management of our personal finances about 3 years into our marriage. He had presented it as lifting a burden from my shoulders, allowing me to focus on growing my company. I had access to our joint accounts but had fallen out of the habit of monitoring them regularly, trusting Nathan's quarterly state of our finances updates. "When did you last receive one of these updates?" Vanessa asked. "About 6 months ago. Everything seemed normal then. He mentioned some reshuffling of investments for tax purposes, but nothing that raised red flags." Vanessa's expression told me this was significant. 6 months is plenty of time to begin moving and hiding assets. Did Nathan's behavior change during this period? I thought back, connecting dots that had seemed insignificant in isolation, but now formed a disturbing pattern. Nathan's sudden interest in blockchain and cryptocurrency, his increased business trips, his suggestion that I add his name to my company's secondary bank account for emergency access, his insistence that we update our wills, with his college friend serving as the attorney. He's been planning this for at least 6 months, I realized aloud. Maybe longer. Most likely, Vanessa agreed, but preparation works both ways. Here's what we're going to do. For the next hour, as nurses periodically checked my vitals, Vanessa outlined our approach. We would file a response acknowledging receipt of the divorce petition, but requesting extended time for full financial discovery due to my medical condition. This would accomplish 2 things: prevent a default judgment if I failed to respond within the standard time frame, and signal to Nathan and his attorney that I wouldn't be rushing into any agreements. Won't asking for more time just give him opportunity to hide more assets? I asked. Vanessa smiled, a confident expression that would become reassuringly familiar in the months ahead. That's exactly what he'll think, which is why we'll be using, this time differently than he expects. While he believes you're focused on recovery and struggling emotionally, we'll be building a comprehensive financial investigation. She explained that she worked with a forensic accountant named Marcus Rodriguez who specialized in uncovering hidden marital assets. Marcus can trace financial movements that most people don't even realize leave footprints: electronic transfers, property records under shell companies, cryptocurrency wallets. He finds what others hide. For the first time since receiving the divorce papers, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not for reconciliation. That door had closed permanently when Nathan showed his true character. But for justice. For maintaining what I had rightfully earned and built during our marriage. "There's one more thing," Vanessa said, her expression serious. "From this moment forward, Nathan will be watching for signs of your emotional state. He'll expect tears, angry calls, emotional outbursts. Those reactions would confirm his assumption that you're too overwhelmed to fight effectively." "So we give him nothing," I concluded. "Exactly. Radio silence is our most powerful tool right now. Let him wonder what you're thinking, what you're planning. Meanwhile, we'll be methodically building our case." As Vanessa prepared to leave, promising to file our initial response the following morning, the hospital room phone rang. The nurse answered, then looked at me apologetically. "Mrs. Hargrove, your husband is calling. He says he's been trying to reach your cell phone." I glanced at Vanessa, who gave a subtle shake of her head. "Please tell him I'm resting on doctor's orders and cannot take calls at this time," I instructed. The strategic game had begun. After Vanessa left, I spent the evening doing something that felt both practical and empowering, creating a comprehensive inventory of every asset I could. Remember, our properties, vehicles, investments, art and wine collections, even significant pieces of jewelry and watches. Next to each item, I noted when and how it was acquired, whose name was on the title or deed, and approximate value. The nurse returning to check my vitals found me surrounded by notes. "This doesn't look like resting," she observed with gentle reproach. "Actually, this is exactly what I need to heal," I replied, surprised to discover it was true. Taking concrete action, preparing for what lay ahead rather than dwelling on the betrayal, felt deeply therapeutic. For the first time since the divorce. Papers arrived. I slept soundly. The following morning, Nathan tried a different approach. Beautiful flowers arrived with a card reading simply, "Let's make this as painless as possible. Call when you're ready to talk." I asked the nurse to donate the arrangement to another patient who might appreciate it more. Later that day, Dr. Winters visited to discuss my recovery. "You're healing remarkably well physically," she observed, reviewing my chart. "How are you doing emotionally? The nurses mentioned your situation." "I'm focused on recovery," I replied, neither denying the emotional impact nor dwelling on it. Dr. Winters nodded approvingly. "That's a healthy approach. I've seen too many patients allow emotional distress to impede physical healing. Still, I'm recommending an additional day of observation before discharge, given the circumstances." This unexpected extra day in the hospital proved invaluable. It gave Vanessa time to file our initial response and begin assembling her team. It allowed me to continue my asset inventory undisturbed. Most importantly, it provided a buffer of physical separation from Nathan during the most vulnerable phase of my recovery. By the time I was discharged 3 days after surgery, several key developments had occurred. Vanessa had secured a temporary restraining order preventing Nathan from selling or transferring any jointly held assets. Marcus Rodriguez had begun his forensic investigation into our finances. And perhaps most significantly, I had made a decision about where to go after leaving the hospital. Rather than returning to our penthouse, where Nathan still resided, despite claiming in his filing that he had already established separate residence, I arranged to stay with my oldest friend, Rebecca. Her guest house offered privacy, security, and separation from the emotional minefield our shared home had become. Nathan's reaction to learning I wouldn't be returning home was immediate. A barrage of text messages arrived as Rebecca drove me from the hospital. "Where are you going? We need to talk." "This doesn't need to be contentious, Olivia. Your things are all here. This is still your home until we sort things out. At least tell me you're somewhere safe." The last message almost made me laugh. After serving divorce papers during my emergency surgery and draining our joint accounts, his sudden concern for my safety rang hollow. Following Vanessa's advice, I responded to only the last message with a brief text. "I am safe and recovering. All communication should go through my attorney, Vanessa Chen." His reply came seconds later. "Vanessa Chen? You've already retained counsel?" I didn't respond, but his reaction confirmed what Vanessa had predicted. Nathan had expected me to be emotionally devastated, physically weakened, and legally unprepared. Learning I had secured representation, especially someone of Vanessa's caliber, had clearly caught him off guard. That evening, as Rebecca helped me settle into her guest house, arranging pillows to support my still tender abdomen, my phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Andrew Caldwell," a deep voice announced when I answered. "I'm representing Nathan in your divorce proceedings. I thought we might discuss parameters for an amicable resolution before things escalate unnecessarily." Nathan's attorney was attempting an end run around Vanessa, another predictable move. "Mr. Caldwell," I replied calmly, "I've retained Vanessa Chen as my counsel. All communications regarding the divorce should be directed to her office. I'm sure you have her contact information by now. Ms. Chen has a reputation for particularly aggressive representation," Caldwell said, his tone suggesting this was a flaw rather than an asset. "Nathan has expressed a desire to handle this matter privately and efficiently. There's no need for protracted legal maneuvering." "I appreciate your call, Mr. Caldwell, but I'll need to end this conversation. As I mentioned, please direct all communication to Ms. Chen." After ending the call, I immediately phoned Vanessa to report the interaction. "Classic intimidation tactic," she observed. "They're worried. Good." The first week of my recovery established patterns that would carry us through the months ahead. While I focused on physical healing and returning to work remotely, Vanessa and Marcus methodically built our case. Nathan alternated between attempts at direct contact, which I consistently redirected to Vanessa, and legal maneuvers designed to expedite the process before we could complete our financial investigation. 7 days after my surgery, Marcus made his first significant discovery. The modest balance in our joint accounts represented just the tip of a financial iceberg. Nathan had been systematically moving funds for nearly 9 months, establishing a complex network of LLCs and offshore accounts. "He's created a layered structure," Marcus explained during a conference call with Vanessa and me. "Funds move from your joint accounts to a domestic LLC, then to a Cayman Islands holding company, then to various investment vehicles. He's clearly been working with someone who knows how to obscure financial trails." "Can you trace it all?" I asked. "Given enough time, yes," Marcus confirmed. "He was careful, but not careful enough. There are patterns, consistency in his methods, and he made one critical mistake. He used the same IP address for most of these transactions." "Meaning?" I prompted. "He did most of this financial shuffling from your home network. Each transfer, each new account creation, each entity formation, they all connect back to your penthouse internet service." This digital breadcrumb trail would prove invaluable in the months ahead. The second significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. As I gradually resumed my role as CEO of my cybersecurity firm, working remotely from Rebecca's guest house. My executive assistant, Zoe, approached me with information she had been hesitant to share. "Nathan called the office multiple times while you were in surgery," she revealed during a video call. "He was asking about contract details for the Meridian project, specifically payment schedules and deposit amounts. The Meridian project was our largest current contract, worth nearly $47 million. Nathan had never shown particular interest in the operational details of my business beyond celebrating major contract signings." "Did you give him that information?" I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral. "No," Zoe assured me. "Something felt off about it. I told him you were the only one authorized to discuss contract financials." I thanked her for her discretion and immediately relayed this information to Vanessa, who added it to our growing file of Nathan's suspicious activities. As my physical strength returned, so did my strategic focus. I had always prided myself on my ability to compartmentalize, to separate emotional reactions from logical analysis. This skill had served me well in building my business and now became essential in navigating my divorce. Nathan's attempts to contact me grew less frequent as he realized his direct approaches weren't working. Instead, he shifted tactics. Mutual friends began calling, casually mentioning they'd spoken with Nathan, who was so worried about me and just wanted to resolve things amicably. I recognized these conversations for what they were: reconnaissance missions designed to gather information about my mindset and intentions. I maintained a consistent message. "I'm recovering well and focused on moving forward. The legal details are in my attorney's hands." This measured response revealed nothing while suggesting calm confidence. It was a psychological strategy Vanessa had recommended, giving Nathan no emotional data points to work with, no indication of whether I was broken, angry, or strategically prepared. 1 month after my surgery, fully recovered physically and growing stronger emotionally each day, I took a significant step. Following Vanessa's advice, I returned to our penthouse while Nathan was known to be traveling for business. Accompanied by Rebecca and a professional organizer Vanessa had recommended, I methodically collected personal items, important documents, and specific valuable pieces that were indisputably mine: gifts from before our marriage, family heirlooms, and items purchased exclusively with my separate funds. The professional organizer, Sarah, was experienced in divorce situations and documented everything meticulously with photographs and inventory lists. "This protects you from claims of inappropriate removal of contested assets," she explained as we worked. In Nathan's home office, a space I had rarely entered in recent years out of respect for his privacy, I noticed something odd. A photo frame on his desk that appeared identical to one I had in my office at work. Upon closer inspection, I realized it was indeed the same design, but the image was different. Where my frame held a photo of Nathan and me on our honeymoon, his contained a picture of him with a woman I didn't recognize. They were standing on a beach, his arm around her waist, both laughing into the camera. The setting looked tropical, possibly the Maldives resort Nathan had claimed to be too busy to visit when I suggested it for our anniversary the previous year. I took a photo of the picture with my phone without commenting on it to Rebecca or Sarah. This wasn't about emotional reactions. It was about gathering information. The timestamp on the image file would later confirm it was taken during one of Nathan's business trips 6 months earlier. As we prepared to leave, I made one final, calculated decision. I rearranged several small items on Nathan's meticulously organized desk. Nothing dramatic, just subtle shifts that would be noticeable to someone as detail-oriented as Nathan. His pen holder moved 2 inches left. His notepad rotated slightly. His chair pulled out at a different angle than his usual precise alignment. Psychological warfare? Rebecca asked with a raised eyebrow, noticing these adjustments. Pattern. Disruption, I corrected. Nathan values control and predictability. Small, unexplained changes will unsettle him more than obvious provocations. Rebecca smiled. I've missed this version of you. The strategic thinker who doesn't take anything. Lying down. Her comment made me realize something important. The woman Nathan had married, confident, strategic, uncompromising in pursuit of her goals, had gradually become subdued during our marriage. I had unconsciously adapted to his preferences, softening my edges, deferring to his decisions in the name of marital harmony. The divorce papers delivered in my hospital room hadn't just signaled the end of our marriage. They had catalyzed the resurrection of my authentic self. Nathan's reaction to my visit was predictable. A text message that evening read, I know you were at the penthouse today. We need to talk about property division before you remove additional items. I forwarded the message to Vanessa without responding directly to Nathan. Her reply came quickly. Perfect. He's rattled. Let's keep him that way. As weeks turned into months, our legal strategy progressed methodically. Marcus continued uncovering Nathan's financial machinations, documenting transfers and hidden accounts. Vanessa built a comprehensive case addressing not just financial concealment, but Nathan's apparent preparation for divorce, while I was focused on growing my business. Through it all, I maintained outward normalcy. I returned to the office, led my team through the successful completion of the Meridian project, and even attended industry events where mutual business associates awkwardly navigated the knowledge of my ongoing divorce. At one such event, I encountered James Preston, Nathan's closest friend and business partner. He approached me at the bar, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. Olivia? He greeted me. You're looking well. Thank you, James. How are you? Good, good. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Look, I'm not taking sides here. But Nathan is concerned about how adversarial this is becoming. He says Vanessa Chen is making unreasonable demands for financial disclosures going back years. I took a sip of my sparkling water, using the moment to compose my response. Standard discovery procedures aren't adversarial, James. They're due diligence. He's worried about how this might affect both your reputations if it drags on. The business community talks. The implied threat was clear. Nathan was suggesting a protracted legal battle might damage my professional standing. Little did he know that my company's board had been fully briefed on the situation, and my transparent handling of the divorce had actually strengthened their confidence in my leadership. I appreciate your concern, I replied evenly. But I've learned to prioritize thorough documentation over expedience. Our conversation ended shortly after, but I knew every word would be reported back to Nathan. Good. Let him wonder what documentation I had, what I knew about his hidden assets, and possible infidelity. The psychological dimension of divorce proceedings is rarely discussed but critically important. While the legal battle unfolds in court filings and attorney conferences, a parallel contest occurs in the mental and emotional realm. Nathan had initiated our divorce believing he held all the advantages: financial control, the element of surprise, and my physically compromised state. Each day that passed with me demonstrating calm strength rather than desperate vulnerability shifted that psychological balance. 3 months after receiving those divorce papers in my hospital recovery room, we approached a critical juncture. Marcus had compiled comprehensive documentation of Nathan's hidden financial network, including evidence of approximately $2 million in concealed assets. Vanessa had assembled a compelling case demonstrating Nathan's systematic financial deception. We were ready for the next phase, formal depositions and court hearings. Nathan made one final attempt at avoiding this escalation. Through Andrew Caldwell, he offered a settlement that, while more generous than his initial filing suggested, still represented less than half of what our complete marital assets were worth. "He's getting nervous," Vanessa observed when we discussed the offer in her office. "He knows what we've found, but he doesn't know exactly how much we've documented. So we proceed as planned?" I confirmed. Vanessa nodded, her expression determined. "The temporary judge assigned to your case is Justice Eleanor Michaels. She has a particular interest in financial transparency in divorce proceedings and has written extensively on the ethical obligations of full disclosure. Nathan couldn't have drawn a worse judge for his approach." The stage was set for a confrontation. That would determine not just the financial terms of our divorce, but vindicate my refusal to be victimized at my most vulnerable moment. As we prepared for the preliminary hearing, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The pain of betrayal had not disappeared. Nathan's calculated cruelty in timing his divorce filing would likely always remain a scar on my emotional landscape. But that pain had been transformed into purposeful determination, a commitment to ensuring that his attempt to exploit my vulnerability would ultimately lead to his own undoing. The morning of our first court appearance, I dressed with deliberate care. A tailored navy suit that projected professional confidence without ostentation. No flashy jewelry, minimal makeup, hair styled simply but precisely. Every element of my presentation was designed to convey stability and credibility. As Rebecca drove me to the courthouse, I received a text from Nathan. "It's not too late to discuss a reasonable settlement before things become public. Call me." I showed the message to Rebecca, who shook her head in disbelief. "He still thinks you'll crack under pressure." "His fundamental mistake," I replied, "was never truly seeing me, who I am, what I'm capable of. He created a version of me in his mind that suited his purposes, and he's still operating as if that version is real." Rebecca glanced at me, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "The judge is about to meet the real Olivia Hargrove. Nathan doesn't stand a chance." As we approached the courthouse steps, I felt a surprising emotion. Not anxiety or dread, but a sense of coming full circle. The woman who had received divorce papers in a hospital recovery room had been caught off guard, but not defeated. The woman climbing these steps was prepared, empowered, and ready to ensure that justice would be served. Nathan was about to discover that his greatest miscalculation wasn't in his financial concealment or even in his betrayal. It was in fundamentally underestimating the woman he had married. The courthouse lobby bustled with activity as Vanessa and I made our way to the designated courtroom. Despite the chaos around us, I felt strangely calm, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil I'd experienced that day in the hospital. The journey from betrayal to this moment had transformed something within me, replacing raw hurt with steely determination. "Remember," Vanessa murmured as we approached the heavy wooden doors. "Judge Michaels appreciates precision and preparation. Nathan and Caldwell will try to portray you as emotionally driven and unreasonable. Your composure is our greatest asset." I nodded, adjusting the portfolio containing copies of our evidence. The weight of the documentation, hundreds of pages, detailing Nathan's financial deceptions, felt reassuring in my hands. Truth has substance. Lies, for all their complexity, are ultimately insubstantial. As we entered courtroom 306, I immediately spotted Nathan and Andrew Caldwell at the plaintiff's table. Nathan wore his favorite power suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, a silk tie the exact blue of his eyes. It was a calculated choice, one I recognized from countless business dinners and charity events where he'd charmed potential investors and partners. Today, however, the effect seemed hollow, like an actor wearing a costume rather than a man in his own skin. Our eyes met. Briefly across the room, Nathan attempted a smile, that same practiced expression that had once seemed genuine, but now appeared as manufactured as his financial disclosures. I responded with nothing but a level gaze before taking my seat beside Vanessa at the defendant's table. The preliminary hearing was largely procedural, establishing schedules for discovery completion, deposition timelines, and tentative trial dates if settlement couldn't be reached. What made it remarkable was Judge Michaels herself, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating brown eyes that seemed to evaluate everything beneath surface appearances. Before we proceed, Judge Michaels began, after the initial formalities, I want to address certain procedural concerns that have come to my attention. She turned her gaze directly to Nathan and Andrew Caldwell. Mr. Hargrove, your initial filing indicated minimal joint assets requiring division. Yet the subsequent financial disclosures submitted by your wife's counsel suggest substantial discrepancies. Can you explain this inconsistency? Caldwell rose quickly. Your Honor, my client's initial filing represented his understanding of relevant marital assets at that time. As discovery has progressed, we've provided additional details as requested. Judge Michaels raised an eyebrow. Additional details is a rather generous characterization for the disclosure of multiple properties, offshore accounts, and investment holdings initially omitted from your filings. Wouldn't you say, Counselor? The subtle rebuke sent a ripple of tension through Nathan's posture. This wasn't the sympathetic reception he'd clearly anticipated. Your Honor, Caldwell continued smoothly, many of these assets are tied to complex business arrangements predating the marriage. My client believes they should be considered separate property. Judge Michaels made a note, her expression neutral. That determination will require thorough documentation and analysis. I'm particularly concerned about the timing of this filing. She turned her attention to me for the first time. Mrs. Hargrove, I understand you were served divorce papers while hospitalized for emergency surgery. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, my voice steady. I received the papers, approximately 2 hours after recovering from anesthesia following an emergency appendectomy. Something flickered across Judge Michaels' features, not exactly anger, but a momentary break in her judicial composure that revealed deep disapproval. Mr. Caldwell, was there some urgency necessitating service at such a time? Caldwell shifted, uncomfortably. Your Honor, the timing was unfortunate but not calculated. My client was simply proceeding with his decision once it was finalized. It was the first outright lie of the hearing, one that Vanessa was prepared to counter. Your Honor, she interjected, rising from her seat with characteristic grace. We have documentation indicating Mr. Hargrove began transferring substantial funds from joint accounts 3 days before Mrs. Hargrove's emergency surgery, the same day she received her diagnosis. We also have evidence of consultation with divorce attorneys beginning approximately 6 months prior, coinciding with the initiation of various financial arrangements we believe were designed to obscure marital assets. Judge Michaels turned a measured gaze to Nathan, who maintained his composed facade despite the visible tightening of his jaw. "Mr. Hargrove, these are serious allegations. If substantiated, they would constitute bad faith in these proceedings." Nathan leaned toward Caldwell, whispering urgently, but maintained his outward appearance of calm confidence, a skill he had perfected over years of high-stakes business negotiations. "Your Honor," Caldwell responded after their brief consultation, "my client categorically denies any intentional concealment of assets. The timing of certain financial decisions was purely coincidental and related to tax optimization strategies. We're prepared to provide complete documentation of these legitimate business decisions." Judge Michaels nodded, her expression making it clear she was reserving judgment. "I look forward to reviewing that documentation. In the meantime, I'm issuing a temporary order freezing all assets identified in either party's financial disclosures, pending further investigation. Additionally, I'm requiring comprehensive financial disclosure from both parties going back 5 years, including all personal and business accounts, investments, property transactions, and significant purchases. The scope of this order, significantly broader than standard procedure, sent another visible ripple of tension through Nathan's carefully maintained composure. Judge Michaels was essentially ordering the exact thorough examination of finances that he had been trying to avoid. The remainder of the hearing established timelines for these disclosures and scheduled our next court appearance. As we prepared to leave, Judge Michaels added a final comment that would prove pivotal in the months ahead. "I want to be absolutely clear," she stated, her gaze moving between Nathan and me. "This court has zero tolerance for financial obfuscation during divorce proceedings. Full transparency is not optional. It is required by law. Any evidence of deliberate concealment will be treated with the utmost seriousness." Outside the courtroom, Vanessa couldn't quite suppress a smile. "That couldn't have gone better if we'd scripted it ourselves," she murmured as we walked toward the elevator. "Judge Michaels' requirements exceed what we would have been able to request under normal circumstances." "You think Nathan will comply?" I asked, watching him and Caldwell in intense conversation at the opposite end of the hallway. "He doesn't have much choice now. Defying a direct judicial order would have serious consequences, both for the divorce proceedings and potentially for his professional standing." As we waited for the elevator, Nathan broke away from Caldwell and approached us. Vanessa subtly positioned herself slightly forward, a protective gesture I appreciated but didn't require. "Olivia," Nathan began, his voice low and controlled, "this level of investigation is unnecessary and potentially damaging for both of us. Certain business arrangements could be misinterpreted if examined without proper context." The statement was revealing, not quite an admission of wrongdoing, but an acknowledgement that his financial activities might not withstand close scrutiny. "I'm simply seeking transparency, Nathan," I replied, matching his quiet tone. "If these arrangements are as legitimate as you claim, there should be nothing to worry about." His expression hardened momentarily before he regained control. "We built a life together for 8 years. Does it really need to end with financial forensic? Accountants and court orders? That decision was made when you served me divorce papers in my hospital room," I responded, meeting his gaze directly. "You chose the battlefield, Nathan. I'm simply ensuring it's a level 1. The elevator arrived, ending our conversation as Vanessa and I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of Nathan's expression, a mixture of frustration and something that looked almost like dawning respect. The weeks following that initial hearing were intense, but productive. Marcus Rodriguez expanded his financial investigation, now armed with court orders that gave him access to records previously difficult to obtain. Nathan's legal team responded with delays and objections, but Judge Michaels consistently ruled in favor of complete disclosure. 3 significant discoveries emerged during this period. First, Marcus uncovered a pattern of systematic transfers to a network of shell companies incorporated in Wyoming, Delaware, and Nevada, states known for their corporate privacy protections. These entities had then purchased real estate and made investments that didn't appear in any of Nathan's financial disclosures. He created a sophisticated structure, Marcus explained during one of our strategy sessions in Vanessa's office. Funds moved from your joint accounts to his personal accounts, then to these shell companies, and finally into investments. The paper trail was deliberately obscured, but not eliminated. The second discovery came from an unexpected source, Nathan's executive assistant, Diane. She contacted me through LinkedIn with a brief message. "I have information you should know. Can we meet privately?" After consulting with Vanessa, I arranged to meet Diane at a quiet cafe far from Nathan's office. She arrived looking nervous but determined, clutching a manila envelope. "I've worked for Nathan for 6 years," she began after ordering coffee. "I've always prided myself on loyalty and discretion, but this—" She slid the envelope across the table. "This crosses a line I'm not comfortable with." Inside were copies of emails and calendar entries showing Nathan had been consulting with divorce attorneys for nearly a year before filing, far longer than we had initially suspected. More damning were documents showing he had created a comprehensive spreadsheet titled Asset Protection Strategy that detailed plans for gradually transferring funds to locations that would be difficult to trace in divorce proceedings. "He asked me to print this for a private meeting last year," Diane explained, indicating the spreadsheet. "I made an extra copy because something about it felt wrong. I've been struggling with whether to come forward." "Why now?" I asked, genuinely curious about her motivation. "2 reasons," she replied, meeting my gaze directly. "First, I overheard him laughing with Andrew Caldwell about serving you papers while you were doped up after surgery. Those were his exact words. Second—" She hesitated. "Nathan's been seeing someone for over a year. Her name is Sophia Reeves. She's a financial advisor who specializes in asset protection strategies for high-net-worth individuals. Their relationship isn't just personal. She's been actively helping him hide marital assets." This information was potentially game-changing, establishing not just the fact of concealment, but premeditated intent. After thanking Diane and assuring her we would protect her identity as a source, I immediately called Vanessa. "This changes everything," she confirmed after reviewing the documents. "We now have clear evidence of not just concealment, but calculated planning over an extended period. Judge Michaels will not look kindly on this level of deception." The third discovery emerged from my own business records. Reviewing company emails from the previous year, I found messages from Nathan requesting specific financial information about my company's valuation, client contracts, and intellectual property holdings. At the time, I had assumed his interest stemmed from genuine support for my professional success. In light of everything else, these inquiries took on a more sinister aspect: information gathering for divorce planning. Armed with these 3 streams of evidence, Vanessa filed a motion for emergency relief, requesting the court to appoint a receiver to take control of all hidden assets, award me temporary exclusive use of our penthouse apartment, order Nathan to pay my legal fees given his demonstrated bad faith, Consider sanctions for deliberate financial misconduct. The motion created exactly the pressure point Vanessa had anticipated. Within hours of its filing, Andrew Caldwell contacted her office requesting an urgent settlement conference. "He's panicking," Vanessa observed with professional satisfaction. The combination of Judge Michael's approach and our mounting evidence has shifted the leverage dramatically. The settlement conference was scheduled for the following week at Vanessa's office, neutral territory that nonetheless signaled Nathan's diminished position. He was now coming to us, rather than the reverse. I used the intervening days to center myself emotionally and strategically. With Rebecca's encouragement, I began meeting with a therapist specializing in recovery from betrayal trauma. Dr. Wilson helped me recognize that while my outward composure and strategic focus were valuable assets in the legal battle, I also needed to process the emotional impact of Nathan's actions. "Strategic strength and emotional healing aren't mutually exclusive," she explained during one session. "In fact, acknowledging your hurt can prevent it from unconsciously influencing your decisions." This balanced approach, addressing both practical and emotional aspects of my situation, proved invaluable as the settlement conference approached. I wasn't seeking revenge or emotional vindication. I was pursuing equitable resolution based on truth and transparency. The morning of the settlement conference, I awoke feeling strangely peaceful. The journey from that hospital bed to this moment had been challenging but clarifying. Whatever financial resolution emerged from today's meeting, I had already achieved something more valuable, reclaiming my agency and self-trust. Nathan and Caldwell arrived at Vanessa's office precisely on time. I noticed immediately that Nathan had abandoned his power suit in favor of more modest attire, a subtle visual concession that didn't escape Vanessa's attention. "Image management," she whispered as we watched them being escorted to the conference room. "He's trying to appear reasonable and conciliatory rather than aggressive." The negotiations began with Caldwell presenting a revised settlement offer that acknowledged significantly more marital assets than Nathan's initial filing, but still excluded several major investments and properties uncovered during our investigation. Vanessa listened politely, then responded with methodical precision. "This proposal remains incomplete. We have documented evidence of the following additional assets that must be included in any settlement discussion." She proceeded to enumerate each hidden account, property, and investment vehicle, along with approximate valuations. As she spoke, I watched Nathan's expression shift from controlled confidence to growing discomfort. He had clearly underestimated the thoroughness of our investigation. When Vanessa finished her detailed accounting, she added, "Additionally, we have documentation of Mr. Hargrove's systematic efforts to conceal these assets, including emails, planning documents, and testimony from witnesses. Judge Michaels has already demonstrated her position on financial transparency. Should this matter proceed to trial, we're prepared to present evidence that would likely result in not just equitable distribution, but potential sanctions." The implied threat was clear, but professionally delivered. Nathan conferred briefly with Caldwell, then made an unexpected request. "Could I speak with Olivia privately for a moment?" Vanessa looked to me for direction. This was unusual in settlement negotiations, but potentially revealing. I nodded my agreement. 5 minutes, Vanessa stipulated, leading Caldwell from the room. When we were alone, Nathan's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. He looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed earlier, the strain of maintaining. His deceptions perhaps finally taking its toll. "This has gone much further than I intended," he began, his tone more genuine than I'd heard in months. "What exactly did you intend, Nathan?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. To serve me divorce papers when I was at my most vulnerable and walk away with most of our assets based on incomplete disclosures? He had the grace to look momentarily ashamed. The timing of the service was Caldwell's recommendation, a strategic decision that I now regret. But you have to understand, I built most of what we have. My business acumen, my investment strategies. Our penthouse was purchased with the proceeds from my first major contract, I interrupted calmly. The Tahoe property was acquired using funds from both our incomes. Even your investment portfolio grew substantially using capital from our joint resources. This wasn't your separate success, Nathan. It was our shared life. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Olivia, regardless of how we got here, we have an opportunity to end this reasonably, without further legal expenses or public scrutiny. Some of my business arrangements are complex. Having them dissected in court could have implications beyond our divorce. The statement was revealing. Nathan wasn't just concerned about losing assets in our divorce settlement. He was worried about broader examination of his financial practices. I've never wanted to destroy you, Nathan, I said truthfully. I've only wanted what's fair based on complete transparency. What would that look like to you? He asked, a question that would have been appropriate at the beginning of this process rather than months into contentious litigation. Full disclosure of all assets acquired during our marriage, followed by equitable division according to standard legal principles. No more hiding, no more manipulation. Nathan nodded slowly, considering my position. And the personal aspects, Sophia? So he knew we'd discovered his relationship. Interesting. I'm not interested in public humiliation or revenge, if that's what you're asking. My concern is financial equity, not punishing your personal choices. Relief flickered across his features. I'll talk to Caldwell. I think we can find a path forward. When Vanessa and Caldwell returned, the negotiations shifted dramatically. Nathan authorized Caldwell to provide a comprehensive asset listing that matched our investigations almost exactly, confirmation that our findings had been accurate. From there, discussions focused on valuation methodologies and division principles, rather than asset discovery. By late afternoon, we had established framework parameters for a settlement that would provide me with full ownership of our penthouse, split investment accounts and property holdings approximately 55-45 in my favor, reflecting the contribution of my business success to our marital assets. Establish a clean break with no ongoing financial entanglements. Include a mutual non-disparagement clause protecting both our professional reputations. As Nathan and Caldwell prepared to leave, Nathan paused beside my chair. For what it's worth, I am sorry about the hospital. That crossed a line. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of his broader deceptions, but it was something. A small recognition of the human impact of his calculated strategy. We all have lines we discover only after crossing them, I replied, neither accepting nor rejecting his limited apology. After they departed, Vanessa and I remained in the conference room, reviewing the day's developments. He came around more quickly than I expected, she observed. Something beyond what we've discovered must be concerning him. He mentioned implications beyond our divorce if his business arrangements were further scrutinized, I confirmed. Vanessa nodded thoughtfully. That suggests potential issues that might interest regulatory authorities. His eagerness to settle could be about more than just our case. Whatever Nathan's additional motivations, The settlement framework represented a significant victory, not just financially, but in the broader principle of accountability. His attempt to exploit my vulnerability had ultimately led to greater scrutiny than a straightforward, honest approach would have necessitated. In the days following the settlement conference, Marcus continued monitoring Nathan's accounts to ensure no last-minute asset movements occurred before our agreement was finalized. His diligence paid off when he detected a transfer of approximately $340,000 to a previously unknown account in Singapore. "It's possible he forgot about this account," Marcus explained when reporting the discovery. "But more likely, he was testing whether we were still watching." Vanessa immediately filed notice with the court regarding this additional concealment. Judge Michaels responded by scheduling an emergency hearing for the following morning, an unusually quick response that signaled her continued concern about Nathan's financial transparency. As I prepared for this unexpected court appearance, I reflected on how much had changed since that first moment in the hospital. The woman who had received divorce papers while still groggy from anesthesia had been shocked and hurt, but not defeated. Each step since then, each document uncovered, each legal strategy implemented, had been part of a transformation from victim to advocate for my own interests. This hearing would represent more than just addressing a final attempt at financial concealment. It would demonstrate that no matter how powerful or clever someone might be, accountability eventually finds its way to the surface. Nathan had initiated our divorce believing he controlled all variables: the timing, the narrative, the financial outcomes. He was about to discover just how thoroughly that control had evaporated. The courtroom awaited, and with it, the culmination of a journey that had begun in betrayal but would end in justice. Judge Michaels's courtroom was notably fuller than during our previous hearing. Word had apparently spread about the emergency session, attracting legal interns, paralegals, and even a few family law attorneys with no direct connection to our case. Something about the combination of substantial hidden assets and a judge known for her uncompromising stance on financial transparency had created a perfect storm of professional interest. I entered the courtroom with Vanessa, maintaining the composed demeanor that had become my armor throughout this process. Across the aisle, Nathan sat with Caldwell, both men engaged in tense, whispered conversation. Nathan's usual confidence had visibly diminished, his shoulders slightly hunched, his movements less assured. When he glanced up and noticed my arrival, he quickly looked away, a telling reaction from a man who had always prided himself on maintaining eye contact during confrontations. "All rise," announced the bailiff as Judge Michaels entered. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, accentuating the sharpness of her gaze as she surveyed the courtroom. After the formalities of opening court, Judge Michaels addressed the matter directly. "We're here regarding an emergency motion filed by Mrs. Hargrove's counsel concerning new evidence of financial transfers not previously disclosed by Mr. Hargrove. Ms. Chen, please proceed." Vanessa rose with characteristic grace. "Thank you, Your Honor. Despite ongoing settlement negotiations and Your Honor's clear directives regarding financial transparency, we have documented a transfer of $340,000 from Mr. Hargrove to a previously undisclosed account in Singapore on Tuesday of this week, 2 days after our settlement conference. This account was not included in any of Mr. Hargrove's financial disclosures, nor was it mentioned during extensive settlement discussions." She presented copies of the transfer documentation Marcus had compiled, including banking records and international transfer confirmations. "Our forensic accountant has traced the funds to an account under the name Orion Holdings, an entity controlled by Mr. Hargrove through a complex ownership structure specifically designed to obscure his connection. Judge Michaels reviewed the documents, her expression darkening. Mr. Caldwell, what explanation can you offer for this undisclosed account and the recent transfer? Caldwell stood, straightening his tie. Your Honor, this account is associated with a business venture, initiated prior to Mr. Hargrove's marriage. My client considered it separate property and thus not relevant to these proceedings. The recent transfer represents normal business operations, not an attempt to hide marital assets. It was a weak defense, and Caldwell's tone lacked conviction, a stark contrast to his usual confident presentation. Judge Michaels was not persuaded. Mr. Caldwell, your client has been ordered multiple times to disclose all accounts regardless of when they were established or what he subjectively believes about their status as marital or separate property. That determination is for the court to make based on complete information. She turned her attention directly to Nathan. Mr. Hargrove, please approach the bench. Nathan rose slowly, his composure visibly strained. As he stood before Judge Michaels, I was struck by how different he appeared from the confident man who had once dominated rooms with his presence. His tailored suit, once a second skin, now seemed to hang slightly wrong on his frame, as if he had lost weight rapidly. Mr. Hargrove, Judge Michaels began, her tone measured but severe. I want to be absolutely clear about the seriousness of your actions. Financial concealment during divorce proceedings isn't merely a strategic maneuver. It constitutes perjury and fraud upon the court. Do you understand that these actions can result in criminal charges, not just civil penalties? Nathan cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. How many more accounts or assets might this court discover that you have failed to disclose? The directness of her question created a palpable tension in the courtroom. Nathan hesitated, glancing toward Caldwell, who gave a barely perceptible nod. Your Honor, there may be certain other investments and accounts not yet formally disclosed. A murmur rippled through the spectators. Judge Michaels silenced it with a sharp glance before returning her attention to Nathan. Mr. Hargrove, I am deeply troubled by this ongoing pattern of concealment despite multiple court orders and explicit warnings. At this point, I have serious concerns about your credibility and compliance capabilities. She turned to address both legal teams. We will proceed as follows. First, I am appointing a special master to take immediate control of all financial assets identified in these proceedings, including those recently discovered. Second, Mr. Hargrove is ordered to produce complete documentation of all financial holdings worldwide within 48 hours, regardless of when established or how titled. Third, a full evidentiary hearing will be scheduled for next week to determine appropriate sanctions for these violations. She paused, her gaze returning to Nathan. Mr. Hargrove, be advised that if additional undisclosed assets are discovered after your compliance deadline, I will have no choice but to refer this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Financial perjury carries potential jail time. Do I make myself clear? Nathan's face had lost all color. Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Chen, Judge Michaels continued, turning to Vanessa. Please prepare the necessary documents for the appointment of a special master. I'm recommending Judith Abernathy, who has extensive experience with complex financial investigations. Thank you, Your Honor, Vanessa replied, making notes. As the hearing concluded and we prepared to leave, I noticed several spectators watching. Nathan with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed judgment. Word of this hearing would undoubtedly spread throughout our professional circles, potentially impacting his carefully cultivated reputation as a shrewd but ethical businessman. Outside the courtroom, Vanessa was measured but visibly pleased with the outcome. Judge Michaels is sending a clear message. The appointment of a special master changes everything. Nathan no longer controls access to these assets or information about them. What exactly will Judith Abernathy do? I asked as we walked toward the elevator. She'll have extraordinary powers to investigate, freeze accounts, demand documentation from financial institutions worldwide, and report directly to the court. Most importantly, she doesn't answer to either Nathan or us. She works for the court with a mandate for complete transparency. As we reached the lobby, I noticed Nathan and Caldwell in intense conversation near the building's entrance. Nathan's gestures were agitated, his expression tense. When he spotted me watching, he abruptly ended his conversation and approached us, much to Caldwell's visible concern. "Olivia, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This has gone too far." Vanessa positioned herself slightly between us. "Any communication should go through counsel, Mr. Hargrove." Nathan ignored her, his focus remaining on me. "Olivia, please. 5 minutes, in private." I considered his request carefully. Throughout this process, I had maintained professional distance, redirecting all communication through our legal teams. But the desperation in Nathan's expression suggested this conversation might yield valuable insights. 5 minutes, I agreed, turning to Vanessa. "I'll meet you at the car." She hesitated, clearly concerned, then nodded. "I'll be right outside if you need me." When we were relatively alone in a quiet corner of the lobby, Nathan's carefully maintained facade crumbled entirely. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd rarely seen from him. "The special master will find things, Olivia. Things that could have implications beyond our divorce." "You mean evidence of financial improprieties more serious than hiding assets from your wife?" I kept my voice neutral, neither accusatory nor sympathetic. "Some of my investment structures operate in regulatory gray areas. They're technically legal but would not withstand aggressive scrutiny. If Judith Abernathy starts pulling threads..." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. "What exactly are you asking for, Nathan?" "Call off the special master. Return to our settlement framework. I'll add the Singapore account and..." He hesitated. "2 others you haven't discovered yet. Full disclosure, fair division, done." His offer confirmed what we had suspected. There were still assets we hadn't uncovered, despite Marcus's thorough investigation. More importantly, Nathan was genuinely afraid of what a court-appointed investigator might find. The appointment of the special master was Judge Michaels's decision, not mine, I reminded him. "I can't simply call it off. Your attorney can request it. Judges typically follow joint recommendations from both parties." I studied him carefully, noting the fine sheen of sweat on his forehead, the slight tremor in his usually steady hands. Nathan wasn't just concerned about losing assets in our divorce. He was afraid of potential legal exposure beyond family court. "I'll discuss it with Vanessa," I said finally. "But complete transparency would be required. Everything, Nathan. No more accounts discovered later. No more transfers. No more games." Relief flooded his features. "Thank you. I'll have Caldwell contact Ms. Chen this afternoon with updated disclosures." As he turned to leave, I added, Nathan, I never wanted to destroy you. I only wanted what was fair. He paused, looking back with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. I know that now. In the car, I recounted the conversation to Vanessa, who listened with professional interest. His concern about regulatory scrutiny is revealing, she noted. The question is whether using that leverage is in your best interest. What do you mean? We could potentially negotiate an extremely favorable settlement by implicitly threatening to let the special master investigation proceed. On the other hand, if Nathan has engaged in activities that cross from tax avoidance into tax evasion or other financial crimes, you might not want to be connected to that, even peripherally. It was a complex ethical consideration I hadn't anticipated. I want what's fair, not what I can extract through fear, I said finally. But I also want complete transparency. No more hidden accounts or assets discovered months or years later. Vanessa nodded approvingly. That's a balanced approach. Let's see what additional disclosures Caldwell provides, then decide our next steps. Later that afternoon, Caldwell delivered a comprehensive financial disclosure that exceeded all previous versions in both detail and scope. The document revealed 3 additional accounts we hadn't discovered. The Singapore account holding $340,000, a Swiss investment portfolio valued at approximately $1. $2 million, a 30% ownership stake in a tech startup headquartered in Austin, potentially worth several million if the company succeeded. Most significantly, the disclosure included a written statement from Nathan acknowledging these had been deliberately omitted from previous filings, a remarkable admission that could have serious consequences if the case proceeded to trial. This is the most complete picture we've seen, Marcus confirmed after reviewing the documents. Based on transaction patterns and account histories, I believe this represents the full extent of his holdings. Vanessa and I discussed our options that evening over dinner at her home, a departure from our usual office meetings that signaled the shift in our relationship from strictly professional to something approaching friendship. We have 3 potential paths forward, she explained, as we settled in her elegant dining room. First, we could proceed with the special master investigation, which would likely uncover whatever Nathan is concerned about regarding regulatory gray areas. Second, we could use this new leverage to negotiate an even more favorable settlement than our previous framework. Or third, we could return to something similar to our previous settlement discussions, with adjustments to include these newly disclosed assets. She laid out the pros and cons of each approach without pushing me toward any particular decision, a hallmark of her client-centered practice that I had come to deeply appreciate. As I considered the options, I realized this decision transcended mere financial calculations. It reflected who I wanted to be moving forward, what kind of foundation I wanted to build for my post-divorce life. I want to return to settlement negotiations, I decided. With the new assets included and perhaps a slight adjustment in the division percentage to acknowledge the pattern of concealment. But I don't want to use regulatory threats as leverage, explicitly or implicitly. Vanessa studied me over her wine glass. May I ask why? Most clients would see this as an opportunity to maximize their settlement. 3 reasons, I replied. First, pragmatically, I don't want my financial future tied to potentially questionable activities that might later be investigated. Second, ethically, using the threat of regulatory exposure as leverage feels uncomfortably close to blackmail. And third, personally, I want to emerge from this divorce with my integrity intact. She nodded thoughtfully. Those are compelling reasons, particularly the first. Distancing yourself from potentially problematic financial structures is prudent risk management. The following morning, Vanessa contacted Caldwell to propose resuming settlement negotiations based on the updated financial disclosures. She suggested a 60-40 split of marital assets in my favor, revised from our previous 55-45 framework, to reflect the pattern of financial concealment while still avoiding protracted litigation. Caldwell's response was immediate and affirmative. A new settlement conference was scheduled for Monday morning. Throughout the weekend, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey from that vulnerable moment in the hospital to this position of unexpected strength. Nathan had initiated our divorce believing me weakened and defenseless. Now he was the one making concessions from a position of vulnerability. Yet I felt no sense of triumph or vindication, only a quiet certainty that I was making decisions aligned with my values rather than reactions driven by hurt or anger. Dr. Wilson had helped me recognize that true empowerment comes not from defeating others, but from remaining true to your own principles, even when opportunities for retribution present themselves. The settlement conference proceeded efficiently, with none of the tension or adversarial positioning that had characterized our earlier negotiations. Nathan appeared subdued but relieved, answering questions directly and offering clarification whenever requested. By late afternoon, we had reached agreement on all substantive issues. A 60-40 division of all marital assets in my favor. Full ownership of our penthouse transferred to me, Nathan retaining his business interests with appropriate offsetting distributions. To me, a clean break with no ongoing financial entanglements, each party covering their own legal fees, mutual non-disparagement provisions. As the attorneys finalized the written agreement, Nathan asked for a brief private word. After confirming, I was comfortable with this, Vanessa stepped outside with Caldwell, leaving us alone in the conference room. I owe you an apology, Nathan began, his tone more genuine than I'd heard in years. Not just for the hospital, which was inexcusable, but for the larger pattern. I convinced myself that because I managed our finances, I was entitled to control them in divorce. It was the most honest acknowledgement he had offered throughout the process. What I've realized, he continued, is that my approach revealed more about my character than yours. I assumed you would be too overwhelmed or intimidated to fight effectively, which says far more about how I viewed you than about who you actually are. His insight was surprisingly perceptive. I think we often create versions of people in our minds that align with our needs or expectations, I replied. The real test of character is how we respond when confronted with the actual person rather than our creation. Nathan nodded slowly. You've responded to everything I've done with more dignity than I deserved. That's something I'll remember long after the details of this settlement fade. As he rose to leave, he extended his hand, a formal gesture that acknowledged both closure and a certain respect that had been absent at the beginning of this process. I accepted the handshake briefly, recognizing it as the epilogue to a relationship that had once held promise but had ultimately revealed incompatible values. When Vanessa returned, she found me standing by the window, watching the late afternoon light transform the city skyline. Everything okay? She asked. Yes, I replied with quiet certainty. Everything is exactly as it should be. The formal signing of our settlement agreement took place 2 days later, followed by a brief court appearance where Judge Michaels reviewed and approved its terms. She dismissed the special master appointment based on our joint request, though not without a final pointed comment to Nathan about the importance of financial honesty in all future proceedings. As we left the courthouse for the final time, Vanessa offered a perspective that would stay with me long after our professional relationship evolved into friendship. What makes your case remarkable isn't the hidden assets or even Judge Michaels's strong stance, she said as we descended the courthouse steps. It's your transformation from that vulnerable moment in the hospital to this resolution on your terms. Most people either collapse under betrayal or become consumed by vengeance. You chose a different path, strategic strength guided by personal integrity. Her observation crystallized something I had been feeling, but hadn't fully articulated. The divorce papers delivered in my hospital recovery room hadn't just ended my marriage. They had catalyzed a profound personal evolution. Nathan had intended that moment to be my greatest weakness. Instead, it had become the foundation for discovering my greatest strength. Not just in uncovering hidden assets or securing a favorable settlement, but in maintaining my values even when circumstances justified abandoning them. As Rebecca drove me home from the courthouse, she asked a question that would shape my thinking about this experience for years to come. What was the moment when everything changed for you? When you went from feeling victimized to feeling empowered? I considered carefully before answering. It wasn't a single moment. It was recognizing that Nathan's actions revealed his character, not my worth. Once I understood that, each step became not about winning against him, but about honoring my own values and boundaries. The judge's face when I revealed Nathan's hidden assets had indeed been momentarily satisfying, a flash of validation after months of methodical work. But the true victory wasn't in that courtroom moment. It was in the woman I had become through this journey. Someone who could face betrayal without being defined by it. Who could fight effectively without sacrificing integrity. Who could rebuild on a foundation stronger than what had been lost. 2 weeks after our divorce was finalized, I stood in my penthouse, now truly mine alone, planning renovations that would transform the space from Nathan's minimalist showcase into a home that reflected my aesthetic and priorities. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Just as I was redesigning these physical spaces, I was consciously reshaping my life according to my authentic values rather than accommodating someone else's vision. The doorbell rang, interrupting my measurements for new kitchen cabinets. The delivery person held a small package, a book-shaped object wrapped in simple brown paper with a note attached. I recognized Vanessa's handwriting immediately. Found this and thought of you. For your new library, V. Unwrapping the package revealed a leather-bound journal with no title on its cover. Inside, on the first page, Vanessa had written a quote. "The most powerful person in any room is the one whose sense of self comes from within, rather than from others' perceptions or approval." The remaining pages were blank, a symbolic invitation to write the next chapters of my life according to my own authentic story. That evening, sitting on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I made my first entry. Today marks 2 weeks since my divorce was finalized. This isn't the ending I would have chosen for my marriage, but it's the beginning I'm choosing for myself. Nathan's decision to serve me divorce papers in my hospital room was calculated to catch me at my weakest moment. What he couldn't have known was that true strength isn't about power or control. It's about maintaining your integrity even when others abandon theirs. I'm rebuilding not just my life, but my understanding of what matters most. Authenticity, integrity, and the courage to stand firmly in your own truth, even when others try to write your story for you. The journey from that hospital bed to this peaceful evening had transformed me in ways Nathan could never have anticipated. His attempt to diminish me had ultimately revealed a strength within myself I might never have discovered otherwise. And for that unexpected gift of self-knowledge, I was strangely paradoxically grateful. 3 months after my divorce was finalized, I found myself standing before an audience of 200 women entrepreneurs at the annual Women in Business Leadership Summit. When the organizer had first approached me about delivering the keynote address, I had hesitated. My story felt intensely personal, not something to be shared on a professional stage. But the theme of this year's conference, resilience in adversity, transforming challenges into opportunities, resonated deeply with my experience. "Good evening," I began, looking out at the sea of expectant faces. When Nancy introduced me, she mentioned my company's growth, our recent expansion into international markets, and the Innovation Award we received last month. What wasn't in my professional bio was that less than a year ago, I was lying in a hospital recovery room, groggy from emergency surgery when a courier delivered divorce papers from my husband. A ripple of shocked murmurs spread through the audience. That moment, being served legal documents when I was quite literally at my most vulnerable, was designed to diminish me, to catch me at a disadvantage. What my ex-husband couldn't have anticipated was that sometimes our lowest moments become the foundation for our greatest strength. For the next 40 minutes, I shared my journey. Not the legal details or financial specifics, but the deeper lessons about resilience, strategic thinking, and maintaining integrity, even when others abandon theirs. I spoke about the difference between emotional reactions and strategic responses, about building the right team during crisis, and about the transformative power of choosing your path forward rather than being defined by someone else's actions against you. The most valuable insight I gained through this experience, I concluded, wasn't about hidden assets or legal strategies. It was the profound realization that our true power never comes from external circumstances or relationships. It comes from within, from our values, our integrity, and our unwavering commitment to honoring our own worth even when others fail to recognize it. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just affirming professionally, it represented a pivotal transition in how I viewed my experience. What had begun as a private trauma had evolved into wisdom that could potentially help others navigate their own challenges. My personal story had become a resource rather than just a wound. After the presentation, a line of women formed to speak with me briefly. Most shared quick words of appreciation or asked questions about business strategy, but one conversation stood out. A woman in her early 40s waited until the others had dispersed before approaching me. "Your talk resonated deeply with me," she said, introducing herself as Catherine. "I'm currently going through something similar, not in a hospital, thankfully. But my husband of 15 years recently informed me he wants a divorce, while simultaneously claiming our business has been struggling financially. Something doesn't add up in the numbers he's showing me." The parallel to my situation was striking. We exchanged contact information, and I promised to connect her with Vanessa and Marcus, who could help her assess whether financial concealment might be occurring. As Catherine walked away, I felt a profound sense of purpose. My painful experience was now becoming a lighthouse for others navigating similar storms. That evening, Rebecca hosted a small celebration at her home, not just for the well-received keynote, but for what it represented. My full re-emergence into public and professional life on my own terms. "To Olivia," Vanessa toasted, raising her glass, "who transformed a hospital bed ambush into a masterclass on resilience that will inspire women for years to come." I'm still not sure how that transformation happened, I admitted, touched by her words. There wasn't a single moment when everything suddenly changed. It wasn't a single moment, Rebecca observed. It was a series of choices, each one building on the last. You chose strategic response over emotional reaction. You chose to build the right team instead of trying to handle everything alone. You chose integrity, even when it might have been easier or more profitable to compromise. Her analysis resonated with something I'd been contemplating throughout my recovery and rebuilding process. Resilience isn't a destination you arrive at after trauma. It's an ongoing practice of making choices that honor your values rather than reinforce your wounds. The months following my keynote presentation brought unexpected developments both professionally and personally. My company secured 3 major new clients who had been in the audience that evening. More significantly, I found myself becoming an informal advisor to women navigating complex divorces involving potential financial deception. Catherine, the woman I'd met after my keynote, became the first of several I helped connect with appropriate resources. Working with Vanessa and Marcus, she discovered her husband had indeed been concealing substantial business assets while claiming financial hardship. With proper documentation and legal representation, she secured a fair settlement that acknowledged her contributions to their joint business ventures. "You changed the trajectory of my divorce," she told me over coffee 6 months later. "Without your guidance, I might have accepted his characterization of our finances and walked away with a fraction of what was rightfully mine." Her words crystallized something I'd been increasingly aware of. The experience that had been designed to diminish me had instead expanded my capacity to help others. The woman who had received divorce papers in her hospital room was now empowering other women to advocate effectively for themselves during similar challenges. This pattern of transforming personal difficulty into broader positive impact continued to unfold in surprising ways. When a well-known business magazine requested an interview about my company's innovative cybersecurity solutions, the conversation naturally expanded to include my perspective on overcoming professional and personal challenges. "You've become known not just for your technical expertise, but for your resilience," the interviewer noted. "Do you find these 2 aspects of your reputation are connected?" "Absolutely," I replied without hesitation. "The same analytical thinking that helps me solve complex cybersecurity problems served me well when navigating my divorce. In both contexts, success depends on seeing patterns others might miss, anticipating challenges before they arise, and maintaining strategic focus rather than becoming distracted by immediate emotional reactions." The article, published under the title "The Resilience Factor: How Olivia Hargrove Built a Cybersecurity Empire While Navigating Personal Crisis," generated an overwhelming response. Business leaders praised the technical insights, while countless women reached out privately to thank me for modeling how to handle personal betrayal with dignity and strategic clarity. 1 year after receiving those divorce papers in my hospital room, I made a significant decision. I established the Hargrove Foundation for Financial Literacy for Women. Using a portion of my divorce settlement, I created an organization dedicated to helping women understand, manage, and protect their financial interests, particularly during major life transitions like divorce. Financial knowledge isn't just about numbers, I explained during the foundation's launch event. It's about agency, independence, and the freedom to make choices based on your values rather than your vulnerabilities. The foundation partnered with law schools, accounting programs, and women's organizations to provide education, resources, and in some cases direct assistance to women facing financial challenges during divorce. Vanessa joined our advisory board, bringing her legal expertise and compassionate approach to our programming. "This is how you transform pain into purpose," she observed during one of our planning sessions. "You've created a resource that will help countless women avoid the situation you faced, or navigate it successfully if prevention isn't possible." The Foundation's work became increasingly important as we identified patterns in how financial concealment often occurs during divorce. Marcus developed training programs for financial advisors, helping them recognize red flags that might indicate hidden assets or deliberate financial obfuscation. As this public and professional rebuilding progressed, I also focused on personal renewal. The penthouse renovation I had begun immediately after the divorce was finally completed, transforming Nathan's sterile showcase into a warm, inviting home that reflected my aesthetic and priorities. Gone were the uncomfortable minimalist furnishings chosen for appearance rather than comfort, replaced with pieces that were both beautiful and functional. My home, like my life, was no longer designed to impress others, but to nurture my authentic self. This theme of authentic rebuilding extended beyond my physical surroundings. I revisited interests and passions that had gradually diminished during my marriage, resuming piano lessons after a 10-year hiatus, joining a hiking group that explored trails throughout the region, rediscovering my love for literary fiction that Nathan had dismissed as a waste of valuable time. These weren't dramatic changes, but they represented something profound, reclaiming aspects of myself that had been subtly suppressed to accommodate someone else's preferences and priorities. 18 months after the divorce, I encountered Nathan unexpectedly at an industry conference in Chicago. We spotted each other across the hotel lobby, a moment of mutual recognition that might have been awkward, but instead felt strangely neutral, as if we were former colleagues rather than ex-spouses. After a moment's hesitation, he approached. "Olivia," he greeted me with professional courtesy. "I read about your foundation's work. It's impressive." "Thank you," I replied, noticing subtle changes in his appearance, slight graying at his temples, less swagger in his posture. "How are you?" "Rebuilding," he admitted with surprising candor. "The SEC investigation was difficult. I had heard through industry channels that Nathan's firm had faced regulatory scrutiny, exactly the gray areas he had feared the special master might uncover during our divorce." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it. Despite everything, I had never wished for his destruction, only for accountability and fairness. "Your foundation," he continued after a brief silence. "It's helping women avoid what you experienced with me, isn't it?" The directness of his question surprised me. "It's helping women understand their financial rights and options during divorce, yes." He nodded slowly. "That's good work. Important work." He hesitated before adding, "I've had a lot of time to reflect on my choices. Not just the financial decisions, but serving you papers in the hospital." He shook his head slightly. "There's no justification for that kind of calculated cruelty." It was the most complete acknowledgement he had offered since our divorce, not a request for forgiveness or reconciliation, but a simple recognition of truth. "We all have moments that reveal our character," I replied. "The question is what we learn from them." He seemed to consider this carefully. "I'm trying to learn the right lessons. It's not a straightforward process." "No," I agreed. "It never is." We parted with professional courtesy, neither friends nor enemies. Just two people whose shared history had irrevocably shaped but no longer defined either of us. That brief encounter prompted unexpected reflection. Nathan's acknowledgement of his actions, however belated, offered a kind of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. More importantly, it highlighted how thoroughly I had moved beyond defining myself in relation to what he had done. The divorce papers in the hospital room were no longer the central narrative of my recent life. They had become merely one chapter in a much larger, richer story. 2 years after the divorce, my personal and professional evolution continued to unfold in ways I couldn't have imagined during those early days of recovery. My company expanded into international markets, opening offices in London and Singapore. The Hargrove Foundation developed partnerships with financial institutions committed to improving women's financial literacy and independence. On a personal level, I had begun a relationship with Daniel, a widowed architect I met through a philanthropic project. Our connection developed slowly, built on shared values and mutual respect, rather than the intoxicating but ultimately unstable chemistry that had characterized my early relationship with Nathan. "What strikes me most about you," Daniel observed one evening as we walked along the riverfront, "is your remarkable balance of strength and openness. Most people who've experienced significant betrayal become either perpetually defensive or recklessly trusting. You found a middle path, discerning without being suspicious, strong without being hardened." His observation prompted me to reflect on the complex journey from that hospital bed to this moment of genuine contentment. I think that balance comes from realizing that while we can't control what happens to us, we always have choices about how we respond, I replied. The hospital papers could have made me bitter or perpetually victimized. Instead, they became a catalyst for reclaiming my authentic self. That transformation doesn't happen automatically, Daniel noted. Many people get stuck in the trauma rather than growing through it. The difference, I suggested, might be whether you see challenges as definitions or developments. If Nathan's betrayal defined me, I'd remain forever the woman who received divorce papers in her hospital bed. But viewing it as a development, painful, but ultimately instructive, allowed me to integrate the experience without being limited by it. This perspective had become central to how I approached both personal and professional challenges, seeing them as developments that revealed opportunities for growth rather than definitions that limited future possibilities. During this period of reflection and continued growth, I received an unexpected email from the conference organizer who had invited me to deliver that first keynote. "We're planning a special panel called Phoenix Stories, Women Who Rose from Professional and Personal Ashes. Would you consider sharing your journey again, this time focused specifically on the transformation from victim to advocate?" My immediate impulse was to decline. I had shared my story once, and it had served its purpose. But something in the framing, the emphasis on transformation rather than victimhood, resonated with the message I believed could benefit others. I accepted the invitation, not to revisit past wounds but to illuminate the path beyond them. The panel discussion brought together 5 women from diverse fields who had faced significant personal or professional setbacks and emerged stronger. As we shared our experiences and insights, patterns emerged that transcended our individual circumstances. "The pivotal moment for me," shared Elena, a tech executive who had lost everything in a business partnership gone wrong, "wasn't when I hit bottom financially. It was when I realized that rebuilding gave me the opportunity to create something aligned with my true values rather than just replicating what I had lost. Exactly, agreed Sophia, whose high-profile wrongful termination had made national headlines. The question isn't, how do I get back what was taken? But, what can I create now that I'm free from those limitations? Their perspectives echoed and expanded my own experience. The panel discussion evolved into a powerful exploration of how adversity, whether through others' actions or circumstances beyond our control, can catalyze authentic growth when approached with intention rather than just reactive emotion. When my turn came to share, I focused not on the hospital papers but on the journey that followed. The most transformative insight, I explained, came gradually through observing my own choices during the divorce process. I discovered that maintaining my integrity during conflict revealed more about my character than any success during easier times. That discovery, that we demonstrate our true values most clearly when tested, has informed every personal and professional decision I've made since. As the panel concluded, the moderator asked each of us to offer one piece of advice for anyone currently facing significant adversity. Remember that how you navigate hardship becomes part of your story, I offered, but it doesn't have to be the defining chapter. You get to decide which experiences shape you and which you simply move through and beyond. The response to this panel discussion extended far beyond the conference itself. A video recording went viral within professional networks, generating discussions about resilience as an active practice rather than an innate quality. 3 years to the day after receiving those divorce papers in my hospital room, I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in delicate pinks and golds. This anniversary, once a painful reminder of betrayal, had transformed into a personal celebration of resilience and renewal. The woman who had been served divorce papers during her most vulnerable moment was not diminished but expanded by that experience. The strategic thinking that helped me navigate my divorce had strengthened my business leadership. The compassion born from personal pain had inspired a foundation helping other women. The self-knowledge gained through rebuilding had created space for an authentic relationship built on mutual respect rather than performance or dependency. My phone chimed with a text from Rebecca. "Happy Resilience Day. Dinner tonight to celebrate. How far you've come." Her renaming of this anniversary made me smile. It perfectly captured the transformation of meaning I had experienced, from a day marking victimization to one celebrating the strength discovered through that challenge. As I prepared for my workday, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of these 3 years. Nathan had served those papers believing he was catching me at my weakest, most vulnerable moment. He couldn't have known he was actually witnessing the beginning of my greatest strength. Not despite the challenge he presented, but because of how I chose to meet it. The divorce papers delivered to my hospital bed hadn't diminished me. They had, in the most unexpected way, set me free. Not just from a marriage built on appearance rather than substance, but from limiting beliefs about my own capabilities. Through the process of rebuilding financially, professionally, and personally, I had discovered capacities for strategic thinking, emotional resilience, and authentic leadership that might have remained dormant in less challenging circumstances. The judge's face when I revealed Nathan's hidden assets had indeed been a moment of validation, a public acknowledgement of truth after months of deliberate concealment. But the true victory wasn't in that courtroom moment or even in the favorable settlement that followed. The victory was in the woman I had become through the journey, someone who faced betrayal without being defined by it, who fought effectively, without sacrificing integrity, who rebuilt on a foundation stronger than what had been lost. That evening, as Rebecca, Vanessa, and other close friends gathered to mark this unconventional anniversary, I shared a reflection that had been crystallizing throughout the day. 3 years ago today, Nathan made a calculation. That serving? Me divorce papers in my hospital room would catch me at my weakest and most vulnerable. What he couldn't have anticipated was that true strength isn't about power or advantage. It's about maintaining your integrity even when others abandon theirs. It's about responding to difficulties with purpose rather than just reaction. And, most importantly, it's about recognizing that challenges don't diminish us unless we allow them to define us. Vanessa raised her glass. To defining yourself rather than being defined by circumstances or by someone else's actions. And to the wisdom that sometimes comes only through difficulty, added Rebecca. As our celebration continued, I felt profound gratitude. Not for the betrayal itself, but for the journey it had ultimately inspired. Nathan's calculated action had revealed his character, not my worth. The path forward had revealed strengths I might never have discovered in easier circumstances. The woman who had received divorce papers in her hospital recovery room had not been destroyed by that moment of vulnerability. She had been catalyzed by it, transformed not into a victim seeking sympathy or a victor demanding vengeance, but into an advocate helping others navigate similar challenges with dignity, strategy, and unwavering commitment to their own worth. In that transformation lay the deepest victory, not over Nathan, but over the limitations that trauma so often imposes. I had not just survived betrayal, I had transcended it, creating a life more authentic, impactful, and aligned with my true values than I could have imagined on that difficult day 3 years ago. The judge's face when I revealed Nathan's hidden assets had been momentarily satisfying, but the face I saw in the mirror each morning, confident, purposeful, authentically my own, represented the true and lasting triumph. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.